Thanks for taking the time to check in. Today is your real estate market update. We have data through July. We're going to look at what's gone on locally here. We'll look at some trend lines and some long term trend lines to kind of see what's happened since the pandemic, what was going on before the pandemic here in the local market. And then we'll look at a national level, talk a little bit about the tale of two markets and what's going on with mortgage rates. I'm going to share my screen and we will get right into it. So I'm going to start with the entire Triangle region. It's a huge region across this area. And just wanted to highlight a few things. I know you hear a lot of the news about home inventory being up, sales being down or flat. There's a lot of speculation as to what's going to happen with home price appreciation this year. But one of the things to remember is it's always important to know what's going on nationally, but real estate is really local. And you'll see that a little bit later in the presentation that there are some differences across the country with regard to what's going on in the real estate market. Locally here in the Triangle, new listings are up for the month of July, almost 18%, and for the year, just over 15%. But this is great news for buyers. If you're a buyer in the market today, there are more options available to you today than there have been in the past. Our closed sales, while you hear a lot about sales slowing and things like that, and the Triangle, we're still doing really well. In fact, July, we had a great month, up almost 11% compared to July of last year, and for the year, up over 4%. When we look at what's happened with the median and the average sales price, relatively flat or a little bit of growth in our either median or average sales price. Where I'm seeing the biggest change is in list prices. So we're seeing a lot of price reductions across the Triangle. I also see more seller concessions today than I have in the past. What are seller concessions? Well, this is a dollar amount something that a seller may give the buyer as a part of the contract. So maybe they give $1,000 as money in lieu of repairs. Maybe they're giving a little bit of money, $2,500 or $2,000 to a buyer to help with their closing costs. And these are things in an effort to keep a transaction together. So I'm seeing that more today than I have in the past. During the pandemic, sellers really didn't have to give anything. Buyers were, paying way over list price. They were buying the property as is. Now, homes in North Carolina are still sold as is, but that doesn't mean you as a buyer can't ask for repairs or money in lieu of repairs. So I have a whole series on buyer tips. Check that out if you want more information on that. But overall in the Triangle, we're seeing list price reductions. And these two percentages here, just for July, show the percentage of the original list price received and the percentage of the last list price received. And you can see it's actually less than what it is year to date. So for July, sellers came off their original list price a little bit more than they have year to date. So they're getting about just under 97% of that original list price and just under 99% of the last list price. So that means that, the last list price, however many price reductions you've had, if you're a seller and you've had two price reductions and you finally go under contract, it's comparing this number to whatever your last list price was. So it's a little bit, different from what we're seeing on a year-to-date basis here in the Triangle. What's going on in Durham County? Similar trends. Inventory is up for July and year to date. Sales were off a little bit in Durham County for the month of July, but still up overall. When you look year over year, the median sales price was down for the month of July, but still up for the year. And then the average sales price for both the month of July and year to date up quite a bit. And we see a similar trend as to what we saw for the entire Triangle MLS with regard to what percentage of the list price that sellers are getting. So, in Durham County, seeing the same trends as we see across the entire Triangle MLS. So sellers are doing price reductions and sellers are coming off their list price in order to sell their home. So you can see in July, very similar trend to what we saw for the entire Triangle MLS, and a little bit different or a little bit less than what we have seen year to date. Wake County, our big county in the Triangle here, we see very similar trends. Inventory is up, sales are up, and then our median sales price flat, and then our average sales price down a little bit, relatively flat versus last year. And then that same trend with regard to percent that sellers are getting of their original list price and their final list price. So that's just a snapshot of what's gone on for the month of July and year to date. Wanted to share some trend lines because I know there's a lot of talk about, when we look at real estate and we compare, it's kind of, I look at, what happened pre-pandemic, what happened during the pandemic, and now we're getting back to pre-pandemic levels in some areas, mainly inventory. So when we look at the month supply of homes, you can see this is a 5-year snapshot, but let's look at just 1 year. You can see our inventory, or our month supply of homes, has been trending up since the end of last year. And we're over 3 months in the entire Triangle MLS, Cary, Raleigh, and Durham. Keep in mind, a normal and balanced market is around a 6-month supply. So we're still below what is considered a normal and balanced market. But when you look at what happened pre-pandemic, so we're going to go back 10 years and we'll look at what happened back in 2019. So in July of this year, all of our, Raleigh, Cary, Durham, MLS over 3 months supply. But when we look at what has happened in July of 2019, where were we in July of 2019? So the year before the pandemic started, you can see in some areas we were over 3 months, and in a couple of areas, Durham and Raleigh, we were under a 3-month supply. So we're actually starting to creep up to pre-pandemic levels or exceeding pre-pandemic levels. And you'll see this when we get into information about the national numbers, that this is a consistent trend that we're seeing in other parts of the country as well. Now, is that bad news? Does that mean you should stay in your home and not sell? No. A 3-month supply is still a low inventory level. Like I said, 6 months is a normal and balanced market. And as things change with mortgage rates and things like that, we'll see more buyers enter the market. So we could see this inventory number be affected pretty quickly if rates come down to a more manageable level. We have seen less volatility with rates, and we'll talk about that as well. So while our month supply is creeping up to pre-pandemic levels, I also like to look at sales price and the average sales price. Now, this goes back 10 years. It's a little crazy looking, but go back 5 years. And if you look at what happened, like at the start of the pandemic, where we were and where we are today with regard to the average sales price, if you bought a home back in the early 2000s, or early 2020, first quarter, second quarter, and going into the pandemic, you can see we have had some volatility in, Cary, for example. We've seen a little bit of volatility in the last few months, but for the most part, everything is still over where it was. We still have a good increase compared to the start of the pandemic. And when you look at what has happened across the country, the average home price values during the pandemic went up about 55%. That was significant. And so now we're seeing some of the hottest markets, ours included, cooling off a little bit. And that's why you're starting to see, inventory creep up a little bit. You're starting to see price reductions, more seller concessions, things like that. It's starting to become a more balanced market, or a little bit more favorable to buyers. I'll also point out here, while I'm in here, the days on market, and I'll narrow down to 1 year here, but you can see days on market, the average is around almost a month. When we look back at the pandemic, there was when, homes would come on the market, they'd sell the first day. So buyers have a little bit more time today to look at the available inventory, make their decisions, ask their questions. They don't have to rush. We're seeing less multiple offer situations. What I see today is homes are either, selling, they'll either come on the market and sell pretty quickly, or they stay on the market and take a little bit longer to sell, and we might see some price reduction. So that's really the market kind of normalizing. We see some areas doing better than others. So it's really getting back to a more normal and balanced and healthy market. And that's a great thing for both buyers and sellers. So that just shows you some trends of what's gone on in the local market. What's going on in the real estate market today? I always look at Raleigh, Cary, and Durham because that's where I sell a lot of homes. And in Raleigh, Cary, and Durham today, there are almost 3,500 homes available for sale. And I always mention this, but keep in mind, this does not reflect everything that's available in new construction communities. So builders will build quick move-in homes or inventory homes where everything's been picked, and it's going to be somewhere in the construction process. It could be in framing, drywall. It could be all done. Sometimes those homes get listed in the MLS and sometimes they don't. So there could be more inventory available to you. And there are more opportunities with new construction today. So if you're a buyer in that market and you're looking in a certain area, definitely explore your new construction options. When we look at what's under contract, over 1,600 homes currently under contract in Raleigh, Cary, and Durham combined. And we're about halfway through August, so I really focused this on last month. What closed last month in Raleigh, Cary, and Durham combined? Over 1,200 homes, and that's actually an increase from what happened last year. We sold almost 1,100 homes in Raleigh, Cary, and Durham combined in July of last year. So sales are up versus last year, which that's a great thing. What is going on in the national market? So the tale of two markets. I thought this was interesting. It is really a tale of two markets. And I do know a lot of agents across the country, and I'm on their Facebook pages and their social media and stuff like that. And you see different messages across the country. We'll start out with a quote here. Since the pandemic housing boom fizzled out in 2022, the national power dynamic has slowly been shifting from sellers to buyers. Of course, across the country, that shift has varied significantly. So in last month's market update, I showed that there are a Redfin study that shows there are actually more sellers than buyers in the market today. But obviously, the dynamics are shifting differently in different parts of the country. So you can see in the Northeast, there's actually more buyers than there are sellers. The sellers are green, the buyers are blue. And in the Midwest, it's a little bit more than sellers, almost even in that particular market. But you can see in the South and the Southwest, so South and North Carolina, where we're at, sellers outnumber buyers by quite a bit. And in the West, same thing. So shifting more to a buyer's market. That's why when I talk about the local data, you're seeing homes sit on the market a little bit longer. We're seeing more price reductions, more seller concessions, because there's more sellers in the market today than there are buyers. And that's great news for buyers. If you're a buyer and you're thinking about getting in the market, this is a great buying opportunity because there's more options available. You have more time to make a decision. You could potentially negotiate a lower price, possibly some seller concessions. So it is becoming more favorable to buyers in our area. And this really aligns with what we're seeing across the South. Now, keep in mind, like our market really exploded during the pandemic. So we're kind of calming down from those levels. Another quote, the South and West continue to see greatest inventory gains and sharpest market slowdowns with longer time on the market and more frequent price cuts. And then obviously the North and the Midwest remain relatively tighter by comparison, but are gradually moving towards buyer-friendly conditions. So it's really kind of balancing out across the country. So it'll be interesting to see how things evolve as we progress into the rest of this year. We talked a little bit about pre-pandemic levels, so you can see this is a comparison compared to pre-pandemic norms. Inventory in the West and South has really recovered. So you can see right here how we compare to what the pre-pandemic levels were. So it's consistent with what we're seeing with regard to buyers and that ratio of buyers to sellers. Across the country, inventory is still below pre-pandemic levels by 13%. But when we look at North Carolina as a state, we're about 1.3 below our pre-pandemic levels. But as you saw earlier in the chart that I showed, that we're just creeping up to be pretty even or a little bit above what our pre-pandemic inventory levels were. So it's a little bit different across the country, but North Carolina as a whole, almost on par with where we were at pre-pandemic levels. Talking about home prices, there's a lot of talk about home prices and people who think home prices are going to plummet and things like that. What we're seeing more today is list price reductions, not home prices plummeting, which you saw in our local market data. For the most part, when we look at these big regions, Wake County, Durham County, the entire Triangle MLS, median sales price, average sales price is either flat for the year or up slightly. But this is the top 50 largest metros, June 2024 compared through June 2025. And you can see across the country, really almost a 50-50 split as far as what's happened with home price, year over year change on home prices. And I always like to point out that I'm from Cleveland, Ohio. So it's funny to see Cleveland as one of the top with year over year price change. And then you can see over here, Texas, Florida haven't seen the largest decline. So really aligns with what we see on a regional basis. So recent stability rate stability really benefits buyers and sellers. So this presentation was from maybe a week or two ago, so it doesn't really reflect what's going on with rates more recently. But this talks about how rates have been more stability or more stable, and we've seen less volatility. This demonstrates, that rates have really moved within this small range for the past few months, which has great news for buyers. It should give you more assurance if you are shopping for a home, that rates are not as volatile today as they have been in the past. Analysts, economists, and mortgage professionals are coining this quarter's activity as one of the most calm periods for mortgage rates in recent memory. And this shows buyer demand is up slightly with regard to mortgage purchase application index. So you can see the green is 2025 and how that compares to 2024. So obviously it gets impacted by rates. When rates start to come down a little bit, that mortgage purchase application index increases, and when they go up, it affects buyers, and less buyers qualify, so it goes down as well. So, but you can see what's happened over the course of the year and how it compares to last year. So, 2023 and 2024 with regard to home sales were two of our tougher years. And so experts are still projecting that 2025, we're going to see an increase when compared to 2024, not as big of an increase as we had originally anticipated at the start of the year. But this is good to see. And this kind of, to see mortgage purchase application index up and more buyer demand up slightly this year is kind of, one of the indicators that will hopefully contribute to a positive year over year sales when we get to the end of the year with regard to housing sales. So this is a chief economist at Realtor.com. I expect a generally downward trend for rates this year, but at a slow enough pace that it might not be noticeable in any given month. Slightly lower mortgage rates towards the end of the year could further improve affordability, but significant improvements appear unlikely. And finally, trying to time the mortgage rates, which I talk about this all the time. Trying to time mortgage rates is really difficult. There's no guarantee that rates are going to be any more favorable in 3 or 6 months. What's going on with rates today? I always look at Mortgage Daily News. That's a great resource. The 30-year fixed is close to 6.5%. So we've seen it gradually get closer to the mid sixes in recent days and weeks and so forth. And so I know a lot of people think, well, I'm just going to wait for rates to come down. And I would say, what do you think everybody else is going to do? As rates come down, more and more buyers are going to qualify, more and more buyers are going to come into the market, and you'll have more and more competition out there. So if you can swing it at the higher rates and it makes sense for you and you find the right house, it makes sense to move forward today, I would encourage you to do so instead of waiting for rates to come down. There's been enough economists and experts in the market who are way smarter than me who have said that we're just not going to see rates come back down to 3%, 4% anytime in the near future. So, based on that, to sit on the market and try to wait for that or try to time the market doesn't make sense. It's kind of like trying to time the stock market. That's also virtually impossible. So hopefully that information is helpful for you. This is my August update with data through July. If you have questions on your neighborhood, if you're local here in the Triangle and you want more information, don't hesitate to reach out. And if you are interested in more videos like this, or as I mentioned, I have buyer tips, seller tips, community tours, city tours, a lot of great information. Check out my YouTube channel. Welcome to Raleigh. I look forward to talking to you again soon, and I hope you have a great day.